Welcome to the meeting room at Global TV Talk Show, a broadcast service of globalbusinessnews.net.
Now, here's your host, Ed Cohen.
This is Ed Cohen in San Diego, a little after 8 a.m., cloudy, November 2, 2021. And this is part of the series on human resources leadership, people leadership, business partnering, and the new and engaging superpower role of HRBPs and HR leadership post-pandemic. Hopefully it's post-pandemic. And let's welcome Ken Somers, who's the leader here.
Good morning, Ed. Thanks very much. By way of the briefest introduction, as Ed said, my name is Ken Somers. And I, after 42 years in the corporate world, I recently formed my own freelance consulting practice. But this is not about me today. This is about my friend, colleague, and in some ways mentor, Louis Scenti. And want to spend just a moment or two introducing Louis, and I'm sure he'll add because I'll never cover everything. But Louis has spent more than 30 years in corporate America, and recently also formed his own practice focused really on providing executive coaching services. And it's really useful to understand a little bit of Louis's background. So let me start with some of the brand names where he's worked. Louis has worked at what is now JP Morgan, some previous organizations that became JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, where he and I overlapped for a period, Lehman Brothers, and he finished his career as the Chief Talent Officer for the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Really, really impressive career Louis has had. And he focuses on coaching executives who need help. And that's really going to be the focus of our discussion today, is Louis's experience as a coach. Again, it's useful to understand that with all of Louis's experience in leadership and organization development, he really understands, like very few that I know, that individual change, executive change, happens only within the context of the surrounding organization's culture. And as he engages coachees, that's foremost in his mind. So bottom line, if I can summarize what Louis does, and you correct me if I misstated in any way, he helps clients to better understand their goals, their motives, and to make intentional choices that maximize their personal and organizational outcomes. So Louis, if I've done you any disservice, please correct us.
No, Ken, no disservice at all. It's an incredibly kind introduction, and I appreciate being here. And I'll also say, it's just always great to chat with you, and Ed, pleasure to be on with you as well.
Thank you. So what is intentional, Ken, if I can ask you?
Well, I'm going to let Louis answer that because he's the master blaster here.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so Ed, it's my experience that, particularly with people who are very successful and have been doing what they do for a long time, a lot of what they do, I guess the academic literature would call it, they are unconsciously competent. So they develop routines and habits and heuristics about how one behaves in a certain situation. And what happens over time is those become sort of default behaviors. And in more complex or in more complicated interpersonal situations, sometimes those behaviors are not going to serve you as well as if you stepped back and said, wait a minute, what is my actual intent in this conversation? And I find that particularly in interpersonal situations, being more intentional about how one says something, about whether one asks a question or whether one makes an assertion, makes all the difference in the world in terms of the health of the relationship.
What is heuristic?
Well, a heuristic would be like the simplest way to describe that would be an if this, then that. So each one of us, whether we think of it as a heuristic or not, we have these mental models that say, if I'm in a situation like this, then I should do that. And these are really unconscious. They drive our behaviors. We may not even be in any way, shape, or form aware of them. And so part of intentionality is surfacing, well, when you're in that situation, why are you doing what you're doing? What's the trigger? Unearthing all those years of sort of programming. And this is kind of interesting in my mind because this has been revealed to us from another branch of science over the last 20 years. We know a lot of this now from what's come out of neuroscience and fMRI technology, whereas before, a lot of this was really just based on the science of psychology and to some extent sociology. So it's fascinating to me now that we have actual sort of brain science that supports this notion that we, for example, feel before we think. And that can get you into a whole host of issues when you're dealing with sticky interpersonal situations.
If I could ask about the difference with this, what you just said, hiring people to work at the Federal Reserve Bank in New York, which is a major power center. Thinking back to financial crisis of '08, when that young guy was the head, and he was making all these big decisions. And what does he know about all that? He was so young. But that was my take on it. Of course, I was younger too. But is it different hiring people in such an important financial power center as the Fed in New York, which runs everything, I think. I mean, that's the power center in the Federal Reserve Bank, isn't it? But the type of people who would work at JP Morgan, for instance, which is a large organization, of course, versus the bank, Federal Reserve Bank. Is there a difference in how you look at things?
Well, having worked in both the sort of what would you say, for-profit side of financial services, a number of investment banks. Thank you, Ken, for running down. Sounds like I couldn't hold a job, frankly. But
no, quite the contrary.
Versus an organization that really is about risk management, oversight, regulation, and policy. You're gonna find, while there may be transferable skills between the two, from a recruitment standpoint, I think you're looking for some differentiated quality. So, if you're in an investment bank, you're looking for people, you want to see people who are going to self-select in because they have a real commercial instinct. Ken, you know this from our days at Morgan Stanley. People who really understand how to create solutions for clients that ultimately translate into money, revenue. At the Fed, that same level of analytical skill, intellectual rigor, that same level of technical skill could be the same. But what you're looking for is people who are going to be energized by being in an organization that's mission driven, in an organization that that is really serving the public. And so that tension between the for-profit side, which, jokingly many years ago, I remember this was when I was at Merrill Lynch, I had a friend who used to say, we do a great job of helping other rich people get richer. And, at the Fed, the idea is we're here to serve the American public. Safety and soundness of the financial system is the primary goal. So I don't want to blather on, Ed, but I mean, I think there are transferable skills, but depending on what you're really looking for in terms of leverage, there are some differentiators that you might select for.
Thank you, Ken.
And Ed, I'm actually quite glad you asked that question, because I do think there are many people, perhaps some members of the audience, perhaps not, who really don't understand the difference between the for-profit side of financial services and the public service side. And Louis, I think that was probably the most eloquent explanation of the big differences that I think I've heard. So thanks for that. And thank you, Ed, for asking question. But I'm going to put Lewis on the hot spot on his area of expertise now. So what we want to do in this chat is really dig into a little bit about your experiences, Lewis, as an executive coach. And I'd like to start by just asking you if you could share with us, what kinds of things are you typically, what kinds of behaviors, what kinds of changes are you typically being engaged for? What are you seeing in this environment?
Yeah, thanks for that, Ken. And again, I want to preface all of this by saying, this is a sample of one, and I don't pretend that this is any sort of an empiric trend that I'm articulating here. And I also want to point out that my time as an executive coach, as you said, Ken, in the intro, as an independent executive coach, is about 2.5 years. Now.
Plus
I
decades
also,
of internal coaching.
right, I was going to say, I also had a lot of experience inside organizations, coaching and setting up coaching programs and literally, buying coaching services. So all of that taken in total, I'm going to speak mostly from what I've observed over the last couple of years. And the pandemic, I don't think, has had much of a bearing on this issue. Interestingly, what I tend to see a lot, and this could perhaps be that I tend to work with executives who are technical leaders or executives who are making some sort of a pivot point from either into a new job or a new level of responsibility. If I were to characterize a common theme that I'm seeing right now, it's really around this notion of how people show up with a degree of personal impact and influence. And the words that you often hear, the presenting problem that the organization identifies when you contract for an executive coaching situation, the words are often around things like executive presence, gravitas, command the room. And this is some of these things are code, as we all know, that have been used specifically to describe development areas for female executives. Interestingly enough, while I do have a number of female clients who've been referred to me with this area of development, I'm seeing it in as many men as I am in women. And it makes me wonder as much about what's happening in the client systems in organizations. Because if this is something that we're seeing across organizations, across individuals, it just makes me wonder, what are we doing or not doing to let executives know, perhaps executives who are technical and have come from a place of being very effective in a subject matter discipline, very effective technically, and maybe were recognized and rewarded for that and suddenly given a leadership role. And now they're in a leadership role and they're trying to influence and lead and have impact solely through the lens of their technical expertise. What as Marshall Goldsmith said, what got you here won't get you there. And so I'm wondering if organizations just need to do a better job of understanding, why are we putting people in these leadership roles? Because it can't be that many people are having trouble showing up with a high level of personal impact and influence. I sometimes wonder whether the criteria for what it means to be influential has even been made clear to people in organizations. So that's probably enough on that.
Yeah. So does that come from the board, that kind of a decision? Or is it somewhere in senior C-suite?
I'd characterize it, Ed, as it comes from the sponsors. So if one is working at the C level, it could very well be the board that is raising that issue. If it's perhaps where I work, which is typically a level below the C-suite, it's CEOs, CFOs, chief operating officers saying, my person who I want to succeed me just doesn't show up with enough impact. They lack gravitas. And that's why we want them to have an executive coach.
So Lewis, are you seeing, are these typically and we're going to generalize here, but are these typically senior management initiated engagements, or are you also seeing the individual say, gee, I feel like I need to be more impactful in order to achieve the next level?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question, Ken. And the bulk of my work is really initiated by sponsors, by organizations. I do have some private clients, however, who have on their own sought me out and said, as an example, someone who is a very senior level general counsel, executive counsel for a large nonprofit, who said, I'm being called upon more and more to be part of institutional decisions, not just legal decisions. And I want to show up and have impact in those discussions. So it's across the board, although as I said, I don't pretend to have such a wide sample that I could make any kind of conclusion from that. But I've seen it in both organizations saying, this is what we believe this individual needs, and in some individuals who are saying, I could use help in this.
Got it. So, and I want to delve a little bit into the company cultural dimensions of this. But before that, I wonder if we can differentiate because in those situations where the company has initiated, they said, hey, Ken, we want you to get a coach because we want you to be better at X, Y, or Z. Are distinct from situations which we typically think of as imposter syndrome, which, to your point earlier, frequently, although not exclusively, bedevils women. Are these more executives saying, you need to do this, or is it, I've reached that level and the individual, because they suffer, for lack of a more elegant term, from what we would think of as imposter syndrome? Or is it both?
I mean, more often than not, I see alignment. It's rare when there is an alignment between what the organization sees as a presenting need and what the client, or some people say coachee, feel like they need to work on. So more often than not, I think there's alignment. And it's funny you should raise imposter syndrome, because there's a really interesting TED talk, and I can't remember the gentleman's name. He's an Australian entrepreneur, tech entrepreneur, and he has a great TED talk on imposter syndrome. And the punchline is everybody walks around with some degree of imposter syndrome. And rather than letting it stop you, kind of lean into it and think about how can the imposter syndrome help me to be more effective? How can I be more curious? I can inquire more. I can phrase my concerns or my lack of confidence as curiosity, as questions. I'm trying to learn here. So, the imposter syndrome thing, I think, is a big deal for a lot of people. I tell my clients, I still, 35 years of all of this, I still feel like an imposter sometimes.
Yeah.
Can I jump in here for a second?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. So first of all, this is a production memo to Paul. On my screen, Ken has some frozen moments whereby the image stalls and the voice is a little bit delayed. So if you could snip that, it would be terrific. And if we have to re-record something, Paul, let us know later. Just so you know, this is going to be cut out, what we're talking about right now. So Ken, I don't know whether you're on high speed, hopefully you are, but it's coming from your side, okay, whereby there's something not connecting fast enough. All right. And so that's what's causing that. I don't know whether you noticed it, but you self-correct, and we could probably splice that through and you won't even notice it.
Okay.
But there may be some time when save that shirt and save that background because we can get you to rehash something, almost like not being an imposter, but being an actor. Okay,
That's
on
great.
okay, on 3, 2, and 1. Okay, we're back with Lou and Ken. So Lou, you mentioned imposter syndrome. Now, for many years, I've associated this thing with women who don't believe they fit in a C-suite environment or a senior corporate environment at not small business, but in a larger, more structured organization. I've heard about this a lot. So in my case, as an entrepreneur here in marketing and sales, entrepreneur means, how do I sell this thing? How do I get some monetization? And do I deserve it? This kind of thinking, but that's the same idea, right?
Sure.
Do I fit in? How am I coming across? Is it real? Or am I being looked at as a phony or too money grubbing? But it's almost the same idea of this imposter syndrome of how you believe yourself to be justified in doing what you're doing. Something like that, right?
Oh, I think you're absolutely right, Ed. I think, and again, I think it cuts across people, gender, races, organizations. I think I think it's a natural, if somebody tells you that they've never had imposter syndrome, I have to question that, because I think each time anyone does anything that they've never done before, takes on a new kind of work, a new project, a new client situation, if you've never done it before, you're not going to do it perfectly the first time. And so I think, to some extent, it's almost like, I think it's almost like a protection mechanism to be a little bit self-monitoring and self-calibrating. And it's when it gets carried over, I think, to being you're so hyper vigilant of what you're doing that it just gets in your way. But I think you're spot on. I think, imposter syndrome is, why would anybody care about my idea? Why would anybody want to buy this product from me? Who am I to be talking as an expert on this broadcast today? That sort of thing.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, I was watching the news last night, on MSNBC, about President Biden, dealing with the Congress, and trying to get everything done. And I mean, the guy has been in government all his life, but never at this level and never with this microscope on him all the time. So how do you think the imposter syndrome is impacting this guy at this moment? Interesting, wow, isn't it? I don't know if there's
there's a question for the ages, I guess. It's hard to say, and it would be completely speculative on my part. But again, there's an apocryphal story about John F. Kennedy wanting Robert McNamara to be his Secretary of Defense. And McNamara turned it down, and Kennedy approached him again. And McNamara said something to the effect of, I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but said something to the effect of, I don't know if I'm prepared to do this, John. And Kennedy said, well, Bob, there's no preparation for being president either. And, I don't know if that relates to your question at all, but who knows what it's like to be president? I guess if you've been vice president, you're about as close as you can get. But I'm not sure I have a great answer for your question.
Yeah. Ken, what does that mean for the business partner approach to that's being a coach? An HR VP is a coach, right?
Typically, I think that the better HR business partners approach their relationships with their clients with at least some dimension of coaching mentality. In fact, I'm trying to think of an organization that I've been with one exception. Every one of the organizations I've ever worked, there's an expectation that as a business partner, particularly at the more senior levels, you are a coach and thought partner to the clients that you support. So I think, that's almost implicit in the job. So, as Lewis mentioned, earlier, he's been in private practice for a couple of years, but he's got decades of being an internal coach and working with coaches. So yeah, it comes with the turf. And it's one of those arrows that you want to have in your quiver as a successful HR business partner, how to be a good coach, which is actually, I'm going to use that as a segue, Lewis, because one of the things I know you and I have talked about before is the organizational climate or the culture, whatever buzzword we want to use this week to describe the environment in any corporation. And I wonder if you can share your experiences, both as an employee and as an independent, on how the culture or the environment of the organization influences coaching decisions.
Yeah. Wow, there's a lot there, Ken. I'm going to just see if I can hone in on one dimension of that. First, as I say to my students at Columbia, I try never to use the C word without qualifying it, because culture could mean so much. It's such a big, broad, wide open statement. So there's a guy named Jesse Price, who is a thought leader around the issue of culture. He works with the firm Spencer Stewart. He calls culture the garbage can of organizational life, because whatever we don't like, we say, oh, that's the culture. We throw it in the garbage can of culture. So I'm going to try and just narrow it in a little bit. I think as it relates to a very fundamental thing, Ken, you've seen this before, I'm sure, a very fundamental thing around how an organizational culture can influence coaching. So a culture, I think, where there is not a lot of feedback and the consequences for doing something incorrectly are very high. If we look at this on a 2x2, right? I look at coaching in organizations like that as really helping people to understand how far can you go, who do you need to notify. I guess the pejorative way to say that would be, how do you CYA, and if you're in an organization where the consequences are high and the feedback is low, how do you affect change or move things forward in such a way that you're not touching the third rail all the time? And so organizational culture like that, I think, would demand a very almost incremental and methodical approach to helping somebody think about how they're going to make change, drive change, create and maintain relationships. On the other end of the spectrum, a culture that's kind of wide open with feedback and the consequences are low for making mistakes, I think you have a lot more latitude in coaching someone in a culture like that to take risks, to be a little bit more entrepreneurial, to be expansive in the way in which you express your leadership and try to drive change. Just a really simple example there, probably too oversimplified, but I think you always have to look at the client system in which you're coaching that person. And what you said in the introduction, Ken, I just want to reinforce. For me, that's informed how I think about coaching. Yes, do I know about adult development, the models associated with how adults develop, stages of development, adult learning, but and this is not to denigrate anyone who comes out of perhaps a clinical background or some other helping profession, but I think without marrying the individual stuff with the organizational stuff, in this, to your question, the culture and how organizations work and what goes on in organizations, without bringing those two things together, I think you're doing the client a disservice by not taking into account the world that they have to go back into and function in. Sorry, that's a little long-winded.
No, that was exactly the kind of perspective that I was hoping to pull out of you. So thank you. It was like perfect. Because I know in my own practice, and mine is a little bit more varied than yours, but with my coachees, I follow the same exact approach. It's what's the environment? What are we trying to achieve? In what context? And what are the barriers to success? And how do we factor that in? So, and I know, my other friend Scott Willett, and
Yes.
Scott shares the same perspective in his practice. This is all
Yes.
about the context in which the engagement happens.
That's right.
And I
That's
think, and the reason I wanted to drill into that for a minute or two is because I think it's important for the people who view this video to understand that coaching is not one-dimensional. It's actually a multi-dimensional engagement. So,
well stated.
so
well stated.
Let me, as usual, you're too kind to me. But Louis, one of the other things that I know we have both seen, and I imagine Ed has probably experienced it either directly or has observed it, is when an organization really is, they'll engage you to be a coach, but it's really a de facto outsourcing of their own management responsibilities.
Right.
And I wonder if you could spend a minute or two talking about how do you deal with that? Yeah.
That is, that is by far, I think, one of the most, if you're wise enough and confident enough to see that at the outset and say no to the engagement, I think that's that's probably the best the best antidote to getting sucked into a situation like that. But in truth, sometimes they masquerade as what I would call sort of a healthy engagement, and sometimes I can speak for myself. Sometimes I'm just not confident enough or comfortable enough to say no to an engagement. So when that happens, I find, the breakdown. This, Ken. The healthy part of an executive coaching engagement is when there's a true partnership between the coach, the person being coached, and the organizational sponsor. And sometimes the sponsor is the boss, sometimes it's the boss's boss, sometimes it's even a really good, solid HR business partner. But if you leave that third leg of the stool out and you're just working with a client and the organization has pretty much said, fix this person. I have a situation right now where I feel very caught between the organization not wanting to deliver very clear feedback to this person about the consequences associated with their behavior. And so it's as if I've been given the fix this person, make them better. We don't want to do it because they're so good at what they do. We don't want them to leave. And I find that it makes life really difficult for everybody.
It really does. I'm sad to say that I can completely empathize with your situation. Been there, done that. And for the coach, it's almost a no-win, because if the organization is not willing to provide that constructive and sometimes consequential feedback, there's a limit to what you can achieve with the coachee.
Oh, so much so. I completely agree. And, because I would hate to leave us on a buzzkill. I can tell you about the flip side of that, where I have an executive and his boss is so amazingly involved that I believe that is one of the key reasons why this engagement has been so successful. She checks in with me, she checks in with him. She asks, what more can I do? Is there a message you need me to reinforce? I mean, this is the ideal for a coach. So we've got both ends of the continuum, don't we?
Yeah. Yep. And it's great to hear about that leader and the investment that she makes in her employee. So,
Yeah.
no, it's awfully nice to hear about those stories. Good enough.
Yeah, right.
Did you
I
want
know.
to? Absolutely. I know we're coming to the end of our time, but I know intentionality, and we talked about intentionality a little bit at the beginning, but I know that that's really important to you in your practice and, frankly, in the way you conduct your life.
10 minutes.
Um, and I wonder, do you want to talk any more about that, or do you feel as though you've said your piece?
Well, I do feel like it's a concept that you hear a lot of people say, I'm trying to be more intentional, and I think it's a major ingredient in coaching is helping people understand. So I often say to clients, I'll work with you on 3 levels: mindset, skill set, and tool set. And mindset is around intentionality, is around understanding why we do what we do. And, sometimes, as you know, Ken, instruments like the Hogan suite can be very useful because it's a personality instrument that's really designed to specifically for workplace application and to help people understand, or at least reflect on, and then draw their own insights about why they do things. To me, is so much more effective than just working at the skill set and tool set level. Because as we all know, when the pressure and the heat is on, it's very easy to default back to our old mindsets, our old tapes. So, you give people techniques, and I've had in Ken, the dreaded chemistry meeting where you're sort of doing a bake off with a client to see whether they like you or whether they don't like you. And people will say, well, I want to get some techniques. And I suspect I've lost business because I've said, I will give you techniques, but techniques will not fundamentally impact your growth as a leader. You've got to think about mindset as well. So I look at intentionality as sort of the what's the right word? The thing that you look underneath to get at mindsets. Boy, that was inarticulate. But yeah, why do I do what I do? I think is really a major question in coaching.
That was beautiful. Thank you for that.
Hi, this is Ed, and I thank you for tuning in to Global TV Talk Show, a unit on globalbusinessnews.net. We broadcast to the world, as you know by now. So I wanted to make sure that you understand that our programs are advertising supported. We're grateful for co-sponsors, advertisers. They have a marketing budget coupled with a strong desire to be associated with our top quality program. And of course, I'm grateful. Thank you. So for the next few minutes, you're going to see some commercials. It's mostly very low key, and our prices are very, very reasonable. Our exposure for the advertisers go 12 months and beyond. Some of our advertisers have been with us since March, April of 2020. And Google Analytics has tracked over 125,000 what they call audience page views, which means you looking at this page, that's a page view. Now, if you happen to go to one of our other shows or to our radio broadcasts or to our newspaper or magazine, those become additional page views as measured by Google Analytics. And so when they say 125,000 since spring of 2020 up through Labor Day, a month ago, that's pretty good numbers. And the past 30 days, Google Analytics has measured just under 6,000 audience page views. And that, according to them, is a 42% increase in audience participation over the month of August. So thank you very much. Well, here's our advertisers, and we'll be back in just a couple of minutes or so, and we'll proceed with this interesting conversation. Thank you.
This episode from the meeting room of Global TV Talk Show is brought to you by
The Bridge School, the accredited international online private school of choice, at bridgek12.org.
Porch Light Rental and Destination Services. Reduce your renter lump sum or managed relocation costs. Visit them at porchlightrental.com.
And by airs.com. With our full range of services, we can help design and manage your international relocation. Find us at airs.com.
Primestone Partners, featuring corporate, government, and developer housing solutions, as well as senior-level advisory services. Find them at primestonepartners.com.
And by International Auto Source. We are the vehicle experts for expats, featuring all major brands of automobiles with flexible solutions and financing. On the web at intlauto.com.
Become a global player in your field.
Cross Culture to Go provides virtual support for your global business and career success.
We can help you thrive in 140 plus countries and markets.
On the web at crossculturetogo.com.
Something that's really neat is that the Bridge School partners with various organizations to provide learning for their students. For example, we partner with a major ballet company, and we are able to enroll several of their students into our school. So now not only is the student able to participate in a school and have a seamless transition while they're very active in their ballet career, but now they have other dancers that are with them that are doing some of the same courses. So it's almost becoming a camaraderie where they're taking similar courses, they're working together on their ballet, and really being able to form this great partnership with these organizations to provide a needed service. A lot of times there are student athletes who will spend hours and hours at the gym or at the basketball courts, wherever it is. And if they're attending a traditional school, they're in school from 8 to 3. They get a quick snack, and then they're at the gym for 3 to 4 hours in the evening. Coming to us and having that partnership, they're able to break that up throughout the day. They can have a morning practice, get some schooling in, have an afternoon practice, finish their schooling in the evening. So there's that flexibility. And additionally, if there are tournaments or performances, it's fantastic because if there's a week where they have shows straight through, they can take that week off of learning and then pick back up when they're done. So it offers this great flexibility. And for the program owners of these sports leagues, it is a win-win situation for them because they see this need. They see this need that their students need to make sure that they are obtaining the grades necessary to be successful adults in our country and in other countries. But it provides them an environment where they can be successful at both.
Hi, I'm Sergey Gorbatov.
I'm Angela Lane.
Together we're researchers, writers and practitioners in the field of human resources.
And we've also been multi-country, multi-assignment career expats.
We owe our professional development and growth to a very large extent to the international assignment opportunities that we have had.
But in a world where distributed work may become the norm, we also want to understand what will happen to the nature, duration, and purpose of international assignments.
Together with our colleague, Julian Dalzell from the University of South Carolina, we're undertaking a study on the future of expatriation.
And we'd value your contribution. You can participate in this important study by completing a simple 10-minute questionnaire.
Access the questionnaire by typing in your browser tinyurl.com/expert study. That's tinyurl.com/expert study. You can also find the link here on Ed's website next to this video.
Thank you for joining us in this study. In return for your contribution, we'll provide you with a copy of our research.
And of course, you'll be invited to an exclusive webinar hosted by Ed, where we will share our findings right here on Global Business News.
And so please go to tinyurl.com/expat study. Take the survey so that we can better understand the future of expatriation.
So I've really enjoyed this. I've learned quite a bit, and there's so much going on between you guys. I didn't want to get in the way because I'm an outsider, and I don't have the experience base that you guys do. But I would think that being a coach, even at the very senior level that both of you are operating at, it's really difficult. Ken, you mentioned last week you had a difficult chore, a project of.
Trying to think which one.
Yeah, you were brought in to fire someone or something like that, or advise.
Oh, yes.
That. I would think that would be a terrible thing.
Yeah. I think the only thing I'll say about that, and I know that Lewis will nod his head in full agreement, is when you have to terminate someone or lay them off or do anything in that yucky zone. So I guess this is a message to HR practitioners near and far. If you ever get comfortable doing that, it's time to get out of the profession. You should feel uncomfortable and yucky every single time you have to do something like that.
Well, because the impact of what you're doing is 360. You as the expert brought in to do it, you may not get another assignment from these guys if they don't feel good about what you did. But meanwhile, you have that person's life, and the other organizational stuff. I don't know what I'm talking about, Lou. Help me out.
It's a good example of outsourcing management.
Ken, you're spot on. That's exactly what I was going to say. I think that's a situation where, you would want company management to be committed and compassionate enough to be able to do something like that. But it's not unheard of. Honestly, we've all heard the horror stories about people being fired by text, or in some other really ruthless way. And I wonder, and I know we probably don't have time to go down this route, but I wonder about where we are coming out of the pandemic. And it feels to me like there was a shift occurring even before the pandemic from what I would term an organization that sort of builds itself around its clients or customers to an organization that builds itself around its employees. And Richard Branson was one of the first people to talk about this a number of years ago when he said, if I believe that if I treat my employees the right way, that they in turn are going to treat my customers the way they would want to be treated. He's certainly successful, but I wonder if in this shift toward a more employee-centric organization, if things like getting fired, getting laid off, you have to wonder whether that's even going to look the way it looks today. I have nothing to base that on. It's pure conjecture on my part, but it does feel like that there's something maybe about this shift that I think is going to change what it's like to be exited from an organization.
Oh, I think you're right, Lewis. I think that as the next normal continues to emerge, a lot of the rules that that you and I grew up with are being rewritten. So we ought to have a panel discussion sometime, Ed, on what the future is going to look like. I think we could pull that together pretty easily.
I think we ought to.
Lewis is part of it.
I think we ought to plan in January to kick off the year with some brain buster like that.
There you go. There you go.
So,
Well-
just to re-edify what you guys were just saying, it just seems like short of like 20 months ago or so, everybody was talking about CX, customer experience, customer centric. I mean,
Now it's the employee experience.
but now it's completely different. And you were talking with Sergi about this recently, Ken.
Yeah.
That you guys came to agreement, and I was just listening. You guys came to agreement that it's gone too far. The pendulum has to come back a little bit.
Yeah, we'll have to introduce Louis to Sergi at some point. You guys would get along famously. But I'm going to bring us to wrap here. Louis Scenti, president of Scenti Associates. Thank you so much. Our audience will find Louis on LinkedIn. You'll find his website. It's cognoscentiassociates.com. I don't think I have to spell that, but Louis, thank you so much for sharing some of your time with us today. Ed, thank you for hosting us.
Thank you.
And I hope it was a good experience for you, Louis.
It was outstanding, Ken. It's always great to spend time with you. And Ed, I thank you so much for your hosting and your great questions. I really appreciate being here today.
Thank you. I've learned so much from Ken. Now you. All right, I think we should end this. All right, thank you. This is Ed in San Diego, Lou north of New York City, and Ken east of Suez. No, east of New York in southern Connecticut. Okay, ciao.
Thank you for joining us in the meeting room at Global TV Talk Show.
Have a wonderful day and stay safe.